So
Thank you.
the next question would be, you worked on a groundbreaking research on how to overcome mental health issues without any consultant or medication. Can you share something about that?
Well, I don't. I do work with psychiatrists, and I do work. I don't. Obviously, I'm not. I don't prescribe any medications or anything like that because I'm not supposed to be doing that. But I have. We work with NGO
Mhm.
organizations. We work with in the UK. We work with mental health service, and I think that the medication does actually have a role to play in it in terms of how to stabilize a person, etc.
Mhm.
But most of our work has been in trying to build in the lived experiences of people.
Mhm.
Because I think, because a person with mental illness, or mental person with experiencing mental distress, not necessarily going into mental illness,
Yeah.
they are an expert in themselves in terms
Mhm.
of they know how they have actually felt.
Yeah.
Whereas a professional, a psychiatrist or somebody may not have actually experienced all those things. They have learned all those things. They know how to actually identify those symptoms in a systematic way in order to
Mhm.
diagnose somebody. But how one feels,
Mhm.
that also varies from culture to culture because actually how
Yeah.
one feels. And again,
Mhm.
as I said at the very beginning, how one reports those symptoms.
Mhm.
So I think from that perspective, we look at the lived experiences of individuals and how we actually try and enable people to transfer that expertise
Mhm.
of those people into creating more knowledge for professionals so that they can actually respond to them in a better style. Say, for example, language difficulties is a common thing,
Mhm.
again, in both in the UK and also in Germany, in terms of people from the refugees and asylum seekers and many of those communities may have language experience trauma in the journey of migration
Mhm.
and how they're actually transferring those thoughts into helping to seek help for other people.
Mhm.
And I think you need to try and understand the journey of migration for many of those people,
Yeah.
which we don't. And just labeling somebody as somebody has got mental illness is not a good thing at all. And it's not actually helping the person. It
Mhm.
is understanding the journey of that, how they've actually got to that stage.
Mhm.
And I think that is something that we tend to do. We also have quite a number of projects, innovative projects
Yeah.
that we do in India. We look at resilience.
Mhm.
Resilience is something that is very important in the current context, and also it's always been a buzzword for the last few years. But the poorest of the poor in our community, and how do they construct resilience? People who are
Mhm.
slum dwelling communities and other daily wage communities, etc. They have been in the news recently because of the COVID pandemic and COVID lockdowns, etc. So how do they construct resilience? And I think many of those people have many inner mechanisms of actually trying to understand themselves and trying to overcome the fear within themselves. They might not be familiar with the social media, but
Mhm.
they know how to basic things about I have to earn a living today, I have to work for my family, and I have to do so X, Y, and Z during the daytime. They might
Mhm.
not be thinking about tomorrow, but they have gone through severe traumatic experiences. They're created by inner strength in themselves, and they're able to articulate those
Mhm.
strengths to other people. And I think so some of the middle class and other people like us may have much more to learn from those communities in how they
Yes.
construct resilience. Because without anything, it's only oneself and how one's own experiences and how is it that they're actually using that wealth of inner strength and
Yeah.
also the family contacts and family relationship
Mhm.
to um, to see through the day and also to get through those adverse
Mhm.
events and activities in everyday life. So I think that is something pioneering that we do. And also we're trying to explore people's experience and perceptions of
Mhm.
mental health awareness
Mhm.
because to be aware of one's mental health and
Mhm.
mental distress
Mhm.
is what is primarily important for what we call mental health literacy.
Yeah. This is
Mm.
a very refreshing view. So I we know that people who come from lower middle class communities, or even the very low below poverty line communities, they have a higher resilience. We always know that they are better coping with stress. They seem more happy and content with life. They are less complaining. They have these day to day, though they have a very big issue, but their day to day seems more happy and content than ours. And this is something we should learn from them. Thank you so much. This is an amazing example. I'm going to use it so many places to help people
Yeah.
understand this part. Thank you so much. So after this, can you share something about the different modes of awareness you're using, because which we were talking about before? So that was really interesting, how we are using arts and
Yeah.
movies and different stuff you're working on to create awareness.
Sure. Well, I think this is one field whereby, as I said very earlier on, the negativity towards mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think society had a very bad misunderstanding of the whole concept of mental health
Yeah.
and mental illness. So we need to actually approach it from different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think health education, not only the professionals might actually listen to it, but ordinary people don't actually listen to
Mm-hmm.
it. But what they do is actually they use theater, they use films, and they have music,
Mm-hmm.
and many other ways of creative arts, how creative arts can be used in communicating that message.
Mm-hmm.
Photography, drawing, and a number of other things as well, because they are easily accessible,
Mm-hmm.
and people can actually use those modalities
Mm-hmm.
either to communicate something that has actually happened in their life,
Mm-hmm.
but also to tell, we normally collect people's stories
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in most of our work, and then we play that story back to those communities, especially the community in Pune and community in Kerala, in India, and then the communities then actually can see how is it that they have what has actually happened to them, and how is
Mm-hmm.
it that they've actually constructed resilience, or have they gone in a negative way towards that. So creating that kind of awareness through, because it is, you're not talking about them, we're talking about a story. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously people are more accessible to those things. And I think it is important that we look at somebody else's story and then how we relate it to our own stories to that person's story. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we try and do through drama and
Yeah.
through films as well.
Wow.
So it is more it, it actually gives us a very powerful medium
Mm-hmm.
for us
Definitely.
to communicate with them, and also for those communities to actually talk back to us about, how we have felt that. I think that is, I've experienced that. This is how I actually have dealt with, and this is what I want to do later on. Or
Mm-hmm.
also even signpost them to see a doctor, or take medication or other things as well. That can also happen through those mediums.
Wow.
Um, so some of the one example is actually we did some work with the tribal community in one tribal
Mm-hmm.
community in Kerala, and soon after the show, soon we did a drama session with them. We had collected their stories and we played that story back to them. And I hear from some of the community workers there is that immediately after that, many people have started taking medication. Many people have actually started self-caring for
Wow.
themselves. Many people have started seeing the doctor, etc. So indirectly, we haven't said that they should do that, but obviously it might actually have had some impact on people.
Wow, that's so amazing. I actually want to be a part of that study where we kind of collect the stories. I really want to see one. So that's really interesting. We have a lot of questions for you from the audience. So first is from Lisa. If there are any cross-cultural studies to look at attitudes around mental health in different groups.
Yes, there are a number of studies.
Oh.
This is one area. Cross-cultural mental health is one area that has been abundant evidence over the last 50 years in terms of the cultural narratives, and how culture does actually play a major
Mhm.
role in some of the things in terms of accessing help, and how one constructs that. Um, but obviously, the professional, the psychiatry group and the mental health professionals don't actually listen to that.
Oh.
And obviously, most of mental health is actually governed by, if I may say so, from some of the pharmaceutical companies. because obviously you
Mm.
have to actually sell the medication. So obviously
Yes.
they control that particular field. And I think obviously culture, obviously, just popping a pill into one's mouth alone will not actually cure mental illness. Alongside that, you also have to work with that person. You also have
Mhm.
to try and create that awareness. It might actually lower the kind of aggression and other thing in the person, or the disturbance could be
Mhm.
lowered. But when that is actually lowered, you need to actually enable the person to try and talk through that process and give the person different ways of actually thinking about things, etc., and how to improve the relationships, how to improve the social skills, and
Mhm.
how to actually be a productive person at work, even though you might actually still have depression. So
Mhm.
I think those things actually have to come from other professionals, and such as psychologists or other therapists. And I think culture, the cross-cultural issues, just actually play a major role in that context. But people don't actually listen to it. It seems to be a specialist academic and research area at the moment.
Mhm. I hope, Lisa, that answers your question. But this is really interesting, like how there is a conflict in the research and the, let's say, application professionals of mental health domain, which is generally not the case when we talk about other sections. Like the research community goes hand in hand with the professionals.
Yes, in this particular field, that is not necessarily so, because obviously
Yeah.
some of the reasons of I earlier as cited earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it is because of the fact that science, because you think that science is beyond culture, but science is actually part of culture too. You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand that. I keep
Yeah.
telling my son exactly the
Yes.
same thing. Science and culture
So
go
go
hand
hand
in
in
hand.
hand.
You got to understand science. In order to understand science, you need to understand the cultural context of where it has actually come from, and
Mm-hmm.
all those things. But even in getting, some of those things we have evidence, but we
Mm-hmm.
might not actually have any randomized control trials to actually
Yeah.
prove some of those things. But we have abundant evidence of lived experiences of people. We call that as actually evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And there are also a number of studies actually showing that how culture actually shapes up, the kind of outcomes of
Yeah.
treatments, etc. And but people are not actually taking that on board because of the fear. I think there's the fear on the policymakers, the fear on the service providers, think that, oh, how are we going to provide? Because there are, in one area in Leicester, there are about
Yeah.
101, 150 odd nationalities.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not actually asking them to actually provide 150 different services for all these communities.
Yes.
There's just one services. We are only asking professionals to be more understanding to those
Yeah.
cultural communities and
Mm-hmm.
try and tweak the way they actually talk to them, the way they understand them, and how they actually use cross-cultural language, cross-cultural issues in the
Mm-hmm.
diagnostic process in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
psychiatric entities, etc. But they don't actually do that. They don't listen to that, and I think that is a major barrier. Many of the communities don't actually access services because of
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they think that these professionals are not accessible. They speak a different language and we speak a different language. And
Yeah.
they don't understand what we are saying. They don't understand our religious beliefs. They don't
Yes.
understand our cultural traditions, etc. And I
Mm-hmm.
think so. It is actually a minefield out there in terms of somebody who's actually interested in studying
Mm-hmm.
for a long time as to how this actually influences one's recovery, mental health recovery,
Mm-hmm.
and that journey of mental health recovery.
This is really a very interesting take on mental health. I haven't seen many people talking about this yet, like at least not on the researchers level, but on the mental health advocate level. But this is definitely a very interesting take, which I will make sure I pursue when we promote mental health and work on it. So my next question here would be, what is your take on how mental health issues like internal stress, anxiety get projected onto the community? So I personally think that in this case, a person who is more content from the inside is a much happier person to be around. So on that, what is your take? Is there any research or studies like on this?
That's what the Eastern philosophy believes in. The whole of Indian philosophy and some of those the religious beliefs is actually based entirely on that.
Yeah.
because I think the mind, the what we the newly marketed mindfulness
Yes.
and other things are actually a way of actually creating that
Yes.
understanding of oneself. Because I think when we are actually bombarded with a number of things from around in our day-to-day life,
Mhm.
uh, the social media being one, work being one, family being one, a lot of things are actually happening in every second in our life.
Mhm.
And how do we actually make sense of it and make some purpose out of all those things, and also keep our objectives in mind and travel that take that journey forward? And I think that requires even when we are actually so disturbed in our own mind about not being ill, but I think in terms of the upheavals that one goes through, even then I think it is important to actually have that calmness, and that is where because it creates some understanding. Why was I actually angry last minute? And why did I actually talk to that person that particular way? And I
Yes.
think to actually have some reflection about that is very crucial. And I think if we don't understand that, then I think
Yeah.
obviously we will never understand how our behaviors are actually causing issues on other people's lives.
Mhm.
And that's where mindfulness and yoga, especially anything, because yoga did not actually was intended for any. I mean, but it has that aura and that sound
Mhm.
scientific idea of creating that inner peace and that inner
Mhm.
strength in oneself, so that you're actually able to reflect your own
Yeah.
behavior and you feel calmness in you, and then you are able to understand all the kind of stimuli that is actually affecting you and create meaning out of it, and enjoy it. And you must still have some havocs here and there, but I think you are actually able to overcome some of those things,
Mhm.
because we are not talking about life is not all about being 100% happiness.
Mhm. Yes.
That is a utopian area. No pill in the world would actually give you that. I know there are pills being marketed for that, but I think no pill in the world would give you that. But I think it is one has to live through that process. One
Yes.
has to make sense out of it. One has to create meaning out of it. And that reflection, that feedback that one receives is the
Mhm.
greatest strength that one we have. That's what we call resilience. And and
Yes.
and and that resilience and that inner strength would actually create that resilience for you
Mhm.
to overcome some of the day-to-day difficulties and negativity one may face in all walks of life, not just in
Mhm.
personal life, in terms of work-wise and many of travels, etc. People
Mhm.
talk about being in a kind of very when you hit traffic, you actually become very angry. Why are you getting very angry when you get to the traffic? Because of the stress that one actually
Yes.
experiences. So a moment perhaps few taking a few deep breaths might actually calm the situation, may be able to
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah, this is very interesting because here in Europe, like I saw a lot of people complaining about the traffic, and I was like, this is not a traffic problem. See the traffic in India, there it's a traffic problem where you're taking like hours to cover few kilometers. Few minutes is not a problem. So I think this is definitely a take on both the parts, mental resilience and how different cultures and countries are dealing with this. This is very
Yes.
interesting.